Okay, so this one is very quick. I guess I'm a very sentimental person, but you know, recently was the 13th anniversary of 9/11, and I just want to make a very quick video about the conspiracy theories on that. Probably make more videos after this, but just a very quick one with my thoughts at the exact moment. I've been watching some very, I'll be honest, I've just had tears in my eye. 9/11 is an event that even 13 years on still gets to me. But anyway, I've been watching things like the voice recordings from the top of the World Trade Center and calls from people on board the planes and things like that. Now, so-called truthers are on those videos and saying it's fake and all that sort of thing. And you know, since that awful day, there's been so much in regards to the 9/11 truth movement, and conspiracy theorists have pumped out a load of stuff which they say shows this was an inside job and all the rest of it. Now, in no way do I want to comprehensively deal with every single thing in this video. I don't intend to do that at all. My own stance on it is that I'm much more swayed to the argument, to the belief that this was a major Islamist attack on the world superpower. That's what I'm much more inclined to believe. But I think we were wrong and naive to believe that 100%. Governments have lied and covered up things before, so it would be naive to absolutely slavishly believe that. But, and another thing, that I do think there's a lot of things that don't add up about events of that day. And it is legitimate in a democracy that people question things like that. So I disagree with people who say that they've got no right to question that. Having said that, sometimes I think truthers go so far to expose what they say is the truth that they become utterly desensitized to how it might make. I mean, they believe it's a lie, but if they would just stop to consider for a second that they might be wrong, if they would just be open-minded enough to consider that whilst they believe that they may be wrong, then would they not consider for a second how disrespectful some of their comments are to the victims? I mean, one of the common theories is that the phone calls from the planes were faked, but someone made a good point in the video that if those calls were fake, then it would require a big cover-up. It would require faking something that would have generally been believed to have not been possible anyway. That is to say, try and word this correctly. I've just went off the video, but I think the guy was making the point that if you are going to fake something like that, in other words, let's say they're CIA agents and they're going to pretend to be distressed cabin attendants and so on, why would they go to the extent of faking something that most people wouldn't believe anyway? If in 2001, for example, phone calls weren't possible from planes, but the problem is they were. So I think the point he was making was that to have a conspiracy theory you need a big cover-up, and to have a cover-up you need to create something. But that something has to be believable in order to work. Now, there's a conspiracy theory is a bit pointless if people don't believe it in the first place. In other words, if they're going to fake something that would be perceived to be impossible in 2001, there wouldn't be much point. But in 2001, phone calls could be taken from planes, and apparently these were CIA tracked as legitimate calls. People were commenting and saying things like, oh, they seem way too calm under the circumstances, but flight attendants are trained to be calm in all circumstances. In emergencies, it's their job. They're trained to do that. And actually, in the end of one of the victims, CC Lyle, her voice does break up towards the end. You know, people don't all respond the same way to stress. You would think, yeah, most people would be sort of really losing it emotionally, but people in a professional job are trained to deal with it in a certain way. that does not mean that just because they sound calm it isn't really happening. I mean, there's a lot of professions where people are trained to be brave, but that doesn't mean they're not feeling fear. So, you know, a boxer going into a ring, sorry for the comparison, but a boxer going into the ring is trained not to show fear, but he or she is afraid. Obviously, the 9/11 is a much more extreme principle, but just because voices that day may sound calm doesn't mean that that's how they were feeling inside. So I think it's grossly disrespectful to push conspiracy theory so far that you would go as far as to say that victims were faking it. I think that's like rubbing salt into the wounds of the families. If you must insist that the government done it or whatever, okay, provide evidence for that, but I think conspiracy theorists and truthers really need to think carefully before they slander victims of that day, which is essentially what they're doing. I've seen conspiracy theorists say, oh, how is it disrespectful to speak the truth? But if they're slandering victims as part of that so-called speaking the truth, then it is a problem. Now, I don't know everything, and as I say, I am not 100%, I don't have 100% knowledge that that event wasn't an inside job. I don't know that 100%. I just find it, I won't say hard to believe, because people would say that's a cop-out. Just because something's hard to believe doesn't mean it doesn't exist. But I think the evidence is flimsy at best, because the sort of things that people are claiming. Another one, for example, is that Flight 175, United Airlines 175, that crashed into the North Tower, was it? Or the South Tower? Sorry, I can't remember. But one of the planes that day, they claimed that it looked black. A lot of witnesses on the ground said it looked black, not like a commercial airliner. But think about it, those people were distressed. They were seeing a terrible event in front of their eyes, looking at an object that's going very fast, that in some cases could be at quite a distance. Now, many objects going fast at a distance are going to look quite dark. So, you know, unless you're very close to the Trade Center, then I don't know how they can really make out the details of a plane that's going that fast. The idea being that it was a military plane, but again, that slanders the victims, because it slanders the people who made calls from that plane, and indeed all the passengers who were on the plane. I mean, are all those passengers fake? Are they not real people? Are their relatives lying? Those are questions the conspiracy theorists have to answer. In other words, if that was a military plane, how do they explain all the passengers on board? What, were they willing participants of the CIA? The problem I have with conspiracy theories is that whilst they might touch on some legitimate questions, they go so far in trying to push what they regard as the truth that they become desensitized to how their argument would make victims' relatives actually feel about the event. And I can understand why some Americans get very angry with these people. They have a right to their opinion, and they certainly have a right to ask questions. And I do think that there's some questions about that day that remain to be answered. But when I see comments on like 9/11 voice videos and so on, just saying fake, fake, this sort of thing, to me that lacks all credibility. They would have more credibility if they argued their case in a mature way. But just saying fake, fake, when it could very likely be real. I mean, for them to be so arrogant that they are right and not consider for a second that they may have got it wrong, it's just very, to me it's a bit like some Chinese nationalists try to claim that the Tiananmen Square massacre was fake by Western media. Now, in the same way, I think they disrespect the victims of that awful day. 9/11, another awful day. I think you have to be very careful if you're going to push conspiracy theories. You need to really, really be sure that the material you're looking at is concrete. And you know, I've seen lots of videos about this, and it puts in all the dramatic music, and it puts lots of sequences together, and granted, the things do seem a bit suspicious, but sometimes there's also gaps that they're not explaining. In other words, gaps that could well be legitimate things. And it's a bit like Jesse Ventura's conspiracy theory series. A lot of it is intriguing, but it's pretty biased, and it doesn't show both sides, and it clearly has an agenda. Likewise, conspiracy theorists aren't really interested in hearing the other side. They're just interested in demonizing the American government. Now, I'm not an idiot. The CIA has a very long history of cover operations, of coup d'etats, has rivers of blood on its hands. So I'm not saying it would be impossible for the CIA to do this, and I think people are naive if they think that any government isn't capable of anything. Any government is capable of anything, but I don't believe, whatever your thoughts on President Bush, I just cannot, I cannot accept that he or his government would have deliberately murdered 3,000 mostly American citizens that day. I just cannot accept that. A man who's spent half a century in a country would want to murder his own people on that sort of scale. I can't really accept that for a second. And to me, there's another aspect to this. I think it's people who are so brainwashed by their hatred of the American government that they want to find reasons to justify that hatred. So they think something on this scale can't have happened as a sort of as just a tragic event by Islamist terrorists. No, there must have been something deeper to it. And you get this throughout history. It's like JFK conspiracy theorists, even Jack the Ripper, people who will never believe that it was some ordinary man on the street, that it must have been a royal conspiracy theory. This is the thing about conspiracy theories. They always make interesting reading. They're interesting, they're intriguing, but quite often they rely on sensationalism rather than hard facts. Now, I'm not saying that cover-ups aren't possible. Of course there are, and there's examples throughout history of that. But in my opinion, conspiracy theorists don't know where to draw a line, and they will pick and choose what they present as evidence in order to vindicate their own views. In other words, they actually ignore other evidence that contradicts their views. So that's my thoughts. Just for the record, I'm not saying that they're wrong. I'm just saying I see a lot of flaws in the approach that they take. I'm not saying they're wrong, because frankly I don't know. This is a bit like belief in God. I don't know for a fact either way. 9/11, I can't say 100% that it wasn't an inside job. I just don't know. But my core instinct, I find it very, very hard to accept that was the case.